So we're starting chapter 4 tonight. We will go through it. I think the slides, we have about the same amount of information, but this one might be a little bit more confusing. So it may take us a little bit longer to get through it. Stop me if you have questions. Some of it is going to be similar to what we've been talking about the last 3 weeks. The same terminology, you'll see the the same type of buckets that we talked about, that raw material, work in process, and finished goods. We're going to walk through some examples, and then we'll have questions during or after. Just stop me, like I always say, just go ahead and stop me if you have a question, and we can go over it there. Do y'all have any questions about any of the homework? So why is this? Here we go. Okay, hang on a second. I just had y'all. Do y'all see a black screen? There we go. Not exactly sure what happened there. Do y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Is it the screen with the PowerPoint on it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I'm having technical issues right now. Hang on one second. I'm trying to get my mouse. There we go. I couldn't get my mouse onto my laptop. I'm trying to put it over here so that way if I want to write something, I can. Okay. Try this again. So normally when I do this, I have it on 2 screens, and it's not on 2 screens right now. Something went wrong that might make PowerPoint unstable. All right, let me try to close it and restart. I'm so sorry. Maybe I should go. I'm going to go grab this. I was trying to open the one that I saved from hang on. Stop share. Okay, I was trying to save, go through the one that I saved on here from last semester. I'm going to go grab the new one because I don't know why it wasn't working right. I couldn't get it to split on the screens.
Hello, I have a question.
Okay.
Is there a way that we could get the notes before, like class, like a few days before?
Yeah, you want it posted on Moodle earlier?
Yes, that would help a lot.
Okay, yeah, I can put it up earlier in the week.
Thank you.
Okay, library. PowerPoint. All right, so let's try this again. I don't know why it asks me that every single time. There we go. Now it's working right. All right, so you see the screen now with the PowerPoint on it? One last thing. Let me try to find my chat window. Okay. All right. So again, just stop me if you have a question, because sometimes I don't always see something come in the chat. All right, so chapter 4, process costing. So it's a little bit different than what we've been doing, but like I said, there's going to be some similarities in what we've talked about the last few weeks. So I like to have these chapters together for the test because they're similar, and we'll change a little bit moving forward. Okay, so we have some similarities between job order costing and process costing. So job order costing is what we were looking at the last 2 weeks, where we have a job that we're going to process, and we want to track information based on that job. And so a lot of times the way our software is set up is that we have job numbers in the system. And as we pull all of those materials, we can cost it out to a particular job. We have a job sheet and we follow that job. And then at the end, we look to see, okay, what was the cost of everything? What did we apply to it? We can use that information to help us make decisions in the future about the jobs that we're doing. If you are a manufacturing plant, you're using an applied predetermined overhead rate, and that gets pulled over to those jobs, and you look at the end of the period and you look to see, did I have over or under applied? How did I do with what we estimated that cost to be to complete the job? And then you may have some companies that are using job costs that maybe they are providing a service where it's a lawyer or an accounting firm and they have clients and they're costing out to those clients so they know how to bill. It could be that you have other companies that are doing construction of some sort, and they want to track how much materials and labor am I going to be using on this particular job. And a lot of times they'll estimate it up front, they'll quote the job, and then when they go out and as they're going through the process of the job, they're pulling all the materials and doing the labor, putting it onto the job. In the end, they'll have reports that they can look at to see what we estimated versus what was our actual cost in order to complete the job. And again, it helps you know where you are. Are we accurate in estimating? Do we need to change things? It helps you make your internal users or your managers and your project managers, they're going to be looking at that to see if you need to make any changes. It could be even material parts managers. And so, so you want to make sure that the information that goes in the system is accurate, it's useful. That way, when they have reports that come out that go into other departments within the organization, those reports that you're getting from accounting, they're useful. You want the accounting team to make sure that that information is accurate. So you may be on at a company, you might not be in the accounting department, but you may be getting reports from the accounting department. So anyway, it's good to understand, you know, how the information's flowing through and how are we using this software and how we're getting the information to know if what you're getting to do your job is accurate. All right, so anyway, so back to process costing. So both systems have material, labor, and overhead costs. So those three things that we talked about, the direct material, direct labor, manufacturing, overhead costs. So for the last couple of weeks, you heard me say those three things. So make sure you understand what each one of those are, how it comes in, how do we put that onto, if we're using job order costing, how do we get it to the job? When we're doing process costing, how does that cost come in? And both systems use the same manufacturing accounts. So we're going to still be looking at that overhead account, raw materials account, work in process account, finished goods account. So the way it flows through a job is the same. There's one small variation to it, but if you understand the job costing system, you should understand the process costing system. So the flows of costs through the manufacturing accounts is basically the same in both systems. All right. Why is it not going forward? There we go. All right, so for job order costing, we just talked about the types of jobs that we use for that system. And we also talked about that job cost sheet. So you'll have something that tells you, okay, here's my job number. This is all the costs that went into it. So process costing is a little bit different. This is going to be a single product that is produced over a period of time. So all of that product is going to be the same. You're not going to have variations to it. It's not going to be one big tailored job for a plane. It's going to be this single product that we're producing a bunch of things, and it's going to be the same over a period of time. And nothing's changing in this production of this product. So I'm able to use it. I'm going to use the same costing system for this one single product that I'm producing. And then we have costs that are accumulated by department. So we talked about bringing information into a job. This time we're going to be looking at what it is that is accumulating per department instead of jobs. And then the unit costs are computed by department. So we're going to break that out, and that's where it deviates a little bit, is how we're going to be looking at departments. So process costing is used for products that are, and we just talked about this, is it different and produced continuously? B, similar and produced continuously? C, individual units produced to customer specifications? Or D, purchased from vendors? So what do you think the correct answer is on that?
A.
No, it's not going to be different and produced continuously. Remember, they got to be the same.
B.
B, we can't have deviations in the product that we're producing. It's going to be one big production of something that is the same product, but multiple units of the same product. So it's B. Any unit in an organization where materials, labor, or overhead are added to the product. So that is our processing department. So remember, I said we're going to break it down a little bit different. And we'll walk through an example so you can see how we calculate all that out. So the activities performed in a processing department are performed uniformly on all units of production. Furthermore, the output of the processing department must be homogeneous, which means it's just not going to change. We're going to keep the same product the same the whole time. Products in a processing costing environment typically flow in a sequence from one department to another. And you'll see, we're going to pull it out this department, it goes in this department, something has to be completed in this department in order to go into the next department. So you'll have phases of the production that's going to go from one to another. All right, so objective 1, record the flow of the materials, labor, and overhead through the process costing system. So we're getting ready to walk through this. So with the job order costing system, we did the same thing. So we had direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. They flowed into the work in process. And then from work in process, they went to finished goods and the cost of goods sold. So we're going to be looking at the same thing. Now, when we did jobs, we had to put that job number in there. So that way we could identify what were the costs for that particular job. So that's a little bit different than what we're going to be doing here. Instead of the jobs, we're just going to replace it with that process department. So it's going to go through the process department. And remember that we have some things that are in work in process. Not everything's going to be finished. Same thing. It's not all going to go into finished goods in that period. So we have to look to see, how do we know what the cost is left in work in process? How do we know how much to move into finished goods? And so that is a little bit different, and we'll take a look at how to calculate that. So the costs are traced and applied to departments in a process cost system. So for purposes of the example, we're going to assume 2 processing departments, A and B, and we're going to use T accounts and journal entries to follow how are things moving through the system. So here's our T accounts. So remember, raw materials. Well, what kind of account is a raw material? Asset, liability, or owner's equity?
Asset.
Asset. And normally assets have what kind of balance? A debit or a credit?
Debit.
Debit. So when I buy my material, it's sitting over here in the debit column. So what's happening here is they're showing you, okay, I'm taking some materials out of the department. Well, how do I reduce that balance? I have to do a credit. So I'm doing a credit to materials and I'm moving it into my work in process. So instead of having a job number for the work in process, now I have departments. So I'm going to be pulling materials out, and I have some stuff going into the department A and some stuff going into department B. As in job order costing, materials are drawn from the storeroom using a materials requisition form. So you're going to have something that's filled out to keep track of where this material is going. And the materials can be added to any processing department. And this is the journal entry that shows you how we're taking it out of raw materials and we're putting it into those departments. So we looked at it on T account, and now we're looking at it in a journal entry form. So when we're pulling that material out, we're reducing. That's why raw materials is a credit. It's going into work in process, which is also an asset account. So we're just moving it from one asset to another. We're reclassing it over to these two different departments. So we're splitting however much it is for A and however much it is for B, and that's our debit side of the entry. All right, now we're looking at our labor. So we have our salaries and wages payable. So I'm liable to pay it in the future. Liable means what? Liability. So that is a normal credit balance because I'm going to have to pay somebody in the future. So there's my credit for the labor that I use for these two different departments for this particular processing of product or whatever we're producing. So we have direct labor going into A and we have direct labor going on B, and they are a debit. So let's look at the journal entry. So the journal entry, we're going to pull it out, put it onto A and B in our departments for however much it costs for each one. And we're setting up that liability for the future. So our payables is going to have a credit. I have to pay my labor costs out, the next period. All right, then we have our manufacturing overhead, and this is the same as well. We have an applied amount and we have actual. So you have two things happening, but you notice it's the same setup as it was when we did the job order costing. So we're going to have some overhead that we're applying to this Department A and Department B. So again, it's the same thing. We're just pulling it out as a credit on manufacturing overhead when we're doing our estimated amount. And we're putting it in onto the job, not the jobs, into the departments as a debit. So here's our journal entry. So we're debiting Department A and B, and we're crediting manufacturing overhead. All right, so in Department A, maybe we bring in some materials and labor, and there's some things that have to happen in Department A before it can go to Department B. So let's think about an assembly line for a car or a car manufacturing, and maybe they have to, have a department for the doors. So we're pulling materials and, like what goes into a door. You have all kind of little electronic mechanisms to have the windows go up and down. You have the glass that goes in the window. You have the gaskets, you got the plastic, you got the outside. So maybe this department for doors, all they're doing is putting doors together. So they're pulling materials. They have people that are doing the work. That's your labor. And you have some overhead that you're going to apply to it. And they have to do that whole assembly of the door before it goes into the next part, which is maybe assembling, those doors onto the body of the car. So it's one department is doing a process. They have all three things coming in. And then once that's completed, they have two doors completed. They're going to transfer those out into the assembly line for putting the car on the mainframe. Does that make sense? You have any questions about these departments and why we would have two different departments and something being completed to go to another? We're good. Okay. All right. So we're taking it out of A. We're going to credit A and we're going to debit Department B. So we're just reclassing it from one asset to another. We have a debit and a credit. They're going to be equal amounts. And this is the journal entry of what it looks like. So remember, it's going into B, so that's why it's the debit, and it's coming out of A, so we're going to credit. Okay. So what happens when we're finished everything in B? So B has its own direct materials, labor, and overhead. So maybe in that assembly department for the car, we have the frame, but there were some things that had to go into it before we were ready to put the doors on. So maybe they have some things that they're doing in that department. All of that gets costed out. We had some materials and different things that we pulled in. And then now we have what was transferred in from the other department, which is the door department. And we've used those. And so now at the end of the process in that department, we have a completed car. Well, once we have that completed car, then we need to move that over to finished goods. So we're going from work in process to finished goods. So same verbiage and same accounts that we did in the last two chapters. The only difference is we've added those departments. It's not a job number. So we're coming out of work in process, it's complete, and we're moving it over to finished goods. Again, we're moving from one asset to the other. It's called goods, cost of goods manufactured, meaning we've manufactured this whole product, and now it's finished. So it's in finished goods. And our journal entry looks like this. So we do our debit into finished goods because that's where it's going. It's down in inventory there. And we're crediting the work in process account for Department B. Now, the cost of goods sold, we won't use that account until we actually sell the product. So we have, all this fleet of cars that we just did, they're all exactly the same. And now it's ready to ship these out to different resellers throughout the United States. So now I'm going to take that finished good and I'm selling it, and all of my costs that went into that finished good now come out and go into my cost of goods sold account. So the number that's associated with that is not my sales number, it's the number that I have from my cost side. Okay, all my costs that went into this finished good, that's what we're looking at right now. So I'm pulling it out of the finished good account and I'm putting it into cost of goods sold. All right, so that's my journal entry. I'm debiting cost of goods sold and I'm crediting finished goods.
I have a question.
Okay.
Was that similar to the job order too, or was that a little bit different?
Nope, same thing.
Okay.
We have a finished good, it goes through the process and that job has a cost associated with it. And that job, when you sell it, is going to go into cost of goods sold, and you'll clear it out of your finished goods account, and then you'll have a sale associated with it. It's the exact same thing.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I was just making sure.
Yeah, but in this situation with process costing, the only difference is instead of looking at one job, maybe this job had a bunch of, different like types of shoes, and maybe this process costing, we're doing this because we're not doing any variations to it. It's all the same. Maybe it's a bunch of jugs or something like that we're going to sell in bulk. So it's usually a bulk of items that are exactly the same when you use that process costing. That's the only difference. But this part right here, the accounting, as far as the journal entries go and the accounts we're using, is the same. The only difference is instead of having that work in process with going to a job number, we have that work in process going to different departments. Okay, so the computations. So in process costing, each department needs to calculate two numbers for financial reporting purposes. So the cost of its ending work in process inventory and the cost of its completed units that were transferred to the next stage of the production. And so we'll have to look at that, because when we say completed units, we will have some that complete and whole and move over. And remember, sometimes we say that some things are work in process and they only a percentage finished. So we're going to look at that and figure out, how do we identify how many units are finished when maybe there's only 60% done and then all of these are 100% done. So we're going to walk through that. So you need the cost of its ending work in process inventory and the cost of its completed units that were transferred to the next phase. So the key to deriving these two numbers is calculating the unit cost within the department. And we're not going to go into the FIFO method. We're only going to do average. All right, the characteristics of the weighted average method. So this method makes no distinction between work done in the prior and current periods. It blends together the units and costs from the prior and current periods. And then the costs, the equivalent units of production for a department are the number of units transferred to the next department or finished goods, plus the equivalent units in the department's ending work in process inventory. So you're probably not really gonna get it until we walk through an example. So we have those conversion costs, direct labor. They're often small in comparison to other product costs and process cost systems, but we have a conversion cost, and this is what the conversion cost looks like. The conversion cost is a combination of that direct labor and manufacturing overhead. So we have that direct material, and then we have direct labor and manufacturing overhead that makes up the conversion costs. Okay, so you want to remember what is making up that, that conversion cost there. And then we have something called equivalent units. So the equivalent units, they are the product of the number of partially completed units. So remember I said we're going to have some units that it says, okay, these aren't all complete. Maybe they're 50% complete, 20% complete. So those we're going to call equivalent units, and the percentage of completion of those units. So when you go through the example, you'll see how to figure that out. But basically it's not completed. It's a work in process. But you want to find something that you can bring in that is going to account for how much did we complete on those units. I want to take some of that cost and know and identify it. So I'm going to add that to my cost of the completed units, and I'm going to add it to the number of completed units in order to do that. So that's what we call equivalent units. And then they need to be calculated because the department usually has some partially completed units in its beginning and ending inventories. And these partially completed units complicate the determination of the department's output for the given period and the unit cost that should be assigned with the output. So we're just trying to account for those variances. You know, you have some that are in there in the beginning, you're gonna have some that move out during the period, you're gonna have some left in there that aren't completely complete. So you'll have beginning and ending that are different, probably different in the percentage completion as well. So we need to try to figure out a way to account for that. So that's what equivalent units, that's what you're doing. So the equivalent units equals the number of partially completed units. So when it says that these are completed and moved out, you're not looking at that. The number of partially completed units times the percentage completion. All right, so equivalent units is the product of the number of partially completed units and the percentage completion of those units with respect to the processing department. The equivalent units is the number of completed units that would have been obtained from the materials and efforts that went into the partially completed units. So let's look at Department A. So we're assuming that we have 500 units and it's ending work in process, and that 60% of that 500 are complete. So not 100%, right? Can't take all of those units out because they're not complete. So we have 60% complete with respect to the processing department. So these 500 partially completed units are equivalent to 300, which is that 500 times 60%. So the equivalent unit is 300. So Department A's ending work in process inventory would contain 300 equivalent units for the period. Okay, so not too hard to calculate. It's 500 times the 60%. You just have to know, when do we need to calculate this? How do we do that? And we're gonna walk through that in just a minute. So for the current period, Jones started with 15,000 units and completed 10,000 units, leaving 500 units and process 30% complete. How many equivalent units of production did Jones have for the period? Well, we know from this that we have 10,000 units that were completed and moved out. So, oops, sorry. I went forward. I was going to write on here, but I'll just leave this up so you can see the calculation. So we know that we had 10,000 units that were completed at 100%. So the whole 10,000 units is going to get brought in. And then we have to add 30% of 5,000 because they were only 30% complete. So we just take the 5,000 times 30%, and we add them together and we get 11,500. So that's how many equivalent units of production we had for the period. All right, so now we're going to walk through an example where we complete the equivalent units using that weighted average method. All right, so we have Smith Company. They report the following activity in the assembly department. And so June 1, we have a work in process of 300 units. It tells us that 40% in the materials is complete, and then the conversion is 20% complete. We have units started in production in June was 6,000, and the units completed and transferred out was 5,400. It was transferred out of A, Department A. In the ending work in process at June 30, we had 900 units. 60% was complete for materials and 30% was complete for conversion. So let's go ahead and look to see how to compute it. All right, so we begin the calculation with the equivalent units that were completed and transferred out of the department. So I might be going back and forth so we can see back to this original example. So how many does it tell us we had that was completed and transferred out? We had 5,400. I don't know. I'm not sure how I could keep that information on each slide. Oh no, we'll see how this works. If I have to change it, then I'll change it so we can go back and forth between the slides. All right, so there's our 5,400. We have materials and conversion. They were completed and transferred out. Then it tells us that June 30th, for the materials, we had 60% complete. We had 20% complete for conversion, and we had 900 units. So if we go back, it was the one that was at the bottom. So at the work in process, the 900, 60% and 30%. I'm sorry, I said 20, but it's 30%. So those are the two numbers. That's where that's coming from on this slide. So the work in process, we have 900 units at 60%. When you do the math, it's 540. So for the materials, our equivalent unit is 5,940. We have 5,940 equivalent units. And then we're going to figure out the conversion. We do the same thing. We do the 900 times the 30% to get 270, and we add that to the 5,400. Okay, so we have a total equivalent units of 5,670. Okay, do y'all have any questions so far on how we did that calculation, or you think you got it? Remember to do the units complete first and just look at it this way. I mean, you're basically doing the same thing, but you know that it's 100%, right? So 5,400 would just stay 5,400 because it's 100%. And then we look to see what was that end in work in process, look at the percentages they give us, and we bring that in to come up with the equivalent units at the end. So it's saying that the equivalent units of production always equals units completed and transferred out. So that's what you want to look at first. And then the equivalent units are remaining in the work in process. So that's looking at your ending. All right, and this shows you basically the same thing. It's just breaking out a little bit different. So we have the materials. We had 6,000 units that we started. We had beginning work in process, 300 at 40% complete. And this was at the top of that one, that slide that we were looking at the chart. This was at the top. It was giving you your beginning balance. So it gave you the number of units, which was 300, and it gave you that percentage, which was 40%. And then we have 5,100 units that were started and completed. And then we had an ending work in process of 900 units, 60% complete. So you have 5,400 completed. And then you have 540 equivalent units. 5,940 is your equivalent unit of production, which is what we just calculated. And then you can do the same thing for the conversion. So we started with 300 units at 20% complete. We have 5,100 units started and completed. And then we had that 30% of the 900 units in that ending work in process. So when we do the math, it comes out to the 5,670. Okay, so we didn't really go over anything new on that last slide, but do you understand how to calculate the units? Do y'all have any questions on that? All right, so we're good. All right, so now we're going to compute the cost of the equivalent unit using the weighted average. So now we're looking at the cost. All right, so here's some new information in blue. So the beginning work in process was 300 units. It's telling you your 40% and your 20% for your materials and conversion. But now it's adding in what was the cost. We had a beginning cost of materials 61.19 and a conversion cost of 39.20. Then we had production that started. We had 6,000 units, and then we had 5,400 units that were completed. They started and completed. And then we had those costs added to the production in June. So this is my added cost that we brought in. We have materials at 118,621 and conversion cost of 81,130. And then it gives us our information for ending work in process again, which was 900 units. Materials 60% complete and conversion is 30% complete. Okay, so all the same information, but we're adding the cost in. So we want to look to see, how do we do the calculation for the cost per equivalent unit? How are we going to calculate that out? So we want to use the weighted average method. So all we're going to do is look at what was the cost in the beginning, the work in process inventory, and then what was the cost that was added during the period. Add those two costs together and divide them by the equivalent units. So we already figured out how to calculate the equivalent unit. So once you do that for each materials and conversion, then you can look at your costs and we can now figure out what is it per equivalent unit. So for the total cost, if you were to add those costs together, the ones that they gave us over here on this slide, so the 61.19 and 39.20 for the beginning balance, I would have 10,039 for the work in process at June 1. Then if I add the costs together for the materials and conversion costs, if I add those together, I should get the 199,751. So all they're doing is adding them together to get these totals. And then for materials and conversion, they're just listing them out. So for materials, I started with 61.19. Here's my added cost. My total material cost is 124,740. Conversion, just picking up the numbers they gave me, work in process in the beginning. And what was cost added during the process during that period. So it's 81,130. Add them together, I got a total cost of 85,050. At the bottom, the equivalent units are what we calculated on the previous slides. So how do we get weighted average? What do you think we're going to do? Anybody have a guess? We're going to figure out two costs, one for material and one for conversion. So what do you think we do? How do you think we figure it out per unit? Somebody's got to have a guess.
Divide something.
We are going to divide something. So we're going to look
total cost per unit.
Yeah, we're going to divide that total cost in the total equivalent units. So here we go. So we kind of have the total cost of 124,740, and we're going to divide it by the 59.40 and come up with $21 cost per equivalent unit. So that's how you calculate per unit. We're just dividing to figure that out. And you do the same thing for conversion. Just take that total cost, divide it by the units, and we get $15. So now we have the cost per unit. All right, so we're going to assign those costs to the units. All right, so ending work in process. So we had the equivalent units. We did this calculation a few slides back when we were looking at the units when we we're trying to calculate it out. Remember, it was 900 in the ending work in process. It was 900 at, I think it was 60%. Let me just make sure that's right. Yeah, 900 times the 60%, and then we had 900 times the 30%, which gave us the 270. So that's where those two numbers are coming from. The 540 and 270 are coming from that ending unit, which was 900, and the percentages they gave us. So now we know what our cost per unit is. We just figured it out. So how do we come up with the total? We're just going to multiply. All right. So we multiply. For materials, we come up with 11,340. For conversion, we have 4,050. And then we can add them together to get the total cost of 15,390. Okay, so now we want to look to see what the units were that were transferred out that were 100% done, right? They transferred out 5,400 of them. So now we just do the same thing. We're just going to multiply it by that cost that we calculated. So for materials, we had 113,400. Conversion, we had 81,000. You add them together, you get 194,400. All right, so we're going to reconcile this. Okay, so we have the cost to be accounted for. So remember, when they first gave us the information, they gave us those two numbers in the beginning, work in process, and they gave us the numbers for the production that was added in for each materials and conversion. Well, if you add them together, remember we had the 10,039 and the 199,751. So those are the costs that they gave us that was in those numbers, and we just add them together to come up with a total cost of the 209,790. And then we just did the chart with the equivalent units that we figured out how much it was per equivalent unit, and then we went through the process of calculating that out a few slides back. Let me go back and show you. Okay, right here. So we did the equivalent units with the percentages for the 900 units, and then we got the cost of 15,390. And then we had our total that was transferred out. We calculate that at the 194. So that is this bottom section right there. So all the bottom section, that's where that's coming from. We calculated it out. The two should match, and that's how you can reconcile by comparing those two. Okay, so then we have operation costing is a hybrid of job order costing and process costing because it possesses attributes of both approaches. So we have operation costing, commonly used when batches of many different products pass through the same processing department. So they're just making a note that you can have a batch, large batches that are coming through, and we're making different products, but we're using the same processing department. So we talked about car assembly of a door. So maybe the door on a Buick Enclave is different than the door on the Buick, what's the smaller one, an Encore. So you have two different vehicles, but they both have doors. And so that department, that processing department, is going to be making different products because they're different doors, but we're using the same team to do it. And so that's all that means, is that we have operation costing, which could be a hybrid. Okay, and that is it for chapter 4. So let's see. Let me take this off of this. Okay, do y'all have any questions about the slides first?
I have a question.
Okay.
You probably already explained this, but can you explain again, like on the slide that you're on now? Where did you get the, or where did you get the 10,039? Like where was
Okay.
how did you like calculate that? Or
Okay, so that was given to us. I'm gonna go back a few slides right here. So this is all the information that they're giving me to be able to do the calculations. This isn't anything that I figured out. This is just given to me in the problem. So it's telling me that my beginning work in process has this amount for materials, this amount for conversion. If you add this together, the 6119 and the 3920, that's going to give you that top section, which is 10,039. And then if you go back and look to see what the costs were that were given to us right here for what was added to production, you add these two together. And that gives you the second number. That's your total cost that was added during production, which is the second number right here, 199,751. And that's how we came up with the total of the 209,000. So that's where these numbers came from. All we're doing is saying, okay, this is how much total cost that they gave us in the beginning of the problem. And now I want to check to see, did I do my calculations correctly to see if I calculated everything out correctly? And it was 21, I think it was 21 and then maybe 15 per unit, this right here. We had to calculate this out based on the information they gave us. We calculated equivalent units. They gave us these costs right here, and we figured out it was 21 and 15. Then we had to turn around and take that number, and let me go to this one because this gives us everything. I had to take that 21 and the 15 and use it based on what I calculated for my equivalent units. So I know that I had 540 in equivalent units for my ending work in process inventory. And then I know that I had 5,400 units that were transferred out because that was given to me. And this one was initially 900 units and it said 60% was complete. That's where the 540 is coming from. So I'm just taking the equivalent units that I came up with and I am going to multiply it by $21. I come up with a cost of 113.4. And then I do the same thing for my conversion, come up with 81,000, add them together and I get 194. So all of this calculation are things that I had to do in order to get those numbers. So I'm just saying I've divvied up the numbers different than the way they gave it to me. I just want to know, does it reconcile back to the original number they gave me? So that is what that slide is doing right here. It's showing you this is what we started with. And then do I end with that when I do my calculations in order to come up with the costs per unit. Right? So I came up with the $21 and the $15 and I added that to my equivalent units and it comes up the same. And that's what you want. You want it to reconcile back.
Thank you for the explanation.
Okay. Do y'all have any other questions?
I do.
Okay.
I have questions about chapter 4, not necessarily the slides.
Okay.
Is there a way that you could like work out some of the homework problems? Like just to give an example of how they might look?
Yeah, let me see if I can get on to one of the homework assignments. Scoot some stuff out the way. So this is. So do you still see my slides right now? Is my screen still being shared?
I can still see the slides.
Okay. All right, let me see if I can find one that kind of walks through. And some of them might take, you know, a little bit to calculate everything out. So you want to make sure that you give yourself enough time to walk through it. Let's see, is this a good one? This one this is a kind of simple one. It's got one thing we're trying to figure out here. Okay, so it's kind of small. All right, so they use the weighted average method for process costing, and they're giving us this information here for one of the departments. It gives us our work in process in the beginning and at the end of the month, shows us our units, shows us the percentages, And it says department started 385,000 units into production during the month and transferred out 409,000 completed units to the next department. All right, so we completed and transferred out 409. So we know that that is how many units came out. Now we got to figure out how do we know the work in process by the percentages? What else do we have to add into that 409,000? And it's going to be different for both because materials has a different percent complete than conversion. So we have to go to this ending work in process number. So we take the 29,000 times the 72% and the 29,000 times the 45%. And when we do the calculation, I have this little answer down here. You won't obviously have this when you're trying to figure it out. Do you see this after you submit? Do you get the answers like this or check?
I don't think so. I could be wrong, but
Oh.
I don't think so.
Okay, I thought that that was the whole reason to give you the practice was if you wanted to submit it in order to get this feedback. Because I have a set to give you the feedback, and I thought this is what they gave you. But
Maybe the practice homework. I'm not sure about the practice homework.
okay, yeah. So I don't know if anybody's tried to use it, but this is what I was hoping you would get. And also, you know, if this has a bunch of boxes, you would be able to see what was filled into these boxes, so you would know what they were looking for. Because sometimes that's a problem too. If you got, you know, different boxes, you're not even sure what to put in them. All right, so here's the calculation. So we're taking that ending work in process number, the 29,000, that was my units, times the 72, I get 20,880, and then 45% for the conversion, which is 13,050. I add them together to come up with my equivalent units. And that's what it's looking for. It's looking for the equivalent units of production. So remember, we do the finished products that was transferred out, which is that whole 409. You want to do that one first. And then you look at the ending work in process and those percentages to do the calculations, and you just add them together. All right, so this time, instead of looking for the equivalent units, it's telling us what that is on the table that it's given us. It tells us what our work in process was for the cost amount. And then we have three that we're looking at. We have materials, labor, and overhead. And then we have the cost that was added during production, materials, labor, overhead, and then we have our units. So now, instead of looking to calculate the units, we're going to be looking to see what is the cost per unit. So I have to figure out all my costs that go in and then divide it by the equivalent units. That's what the last piece that we just did on those slides. And so that's what this problem is going to walk you through. So we have to look, what did we have in the beginning, which for materials, we're going to walk through the materials one. So for the beginning work in process, we had that 39.4, plus we had 238,955 that was added to the production. I add those two numbers together to get the total cost. And then we've already been given the equivalent units, so we're just divide by the 3,300 units. And it gives me the 84.35 per unit. So it's not hard. It might seem a little bit intimidating at first, like where do I get the numbers from? But it's not really that hard. Going through the slides are definitely helpful. And then let's see what this one's doing. So they want to compute the cost of ending work in process inventory for material conversion and in total. So we're going to add them together and then compute the cost of the units completed. So they want the cost of the ending work in process, and they want the cost of the units that were transferred out. Okay, so they're telling us this. We have equivalent units in ending inventory. ending work in process inventory 2150 and 820, It tells us our cost per equivalent unit. So now we don't even have to calculate that out. It's already given it to us. So now we have to compute it. Well, we have to compute the equivalent units. It says a total of 20,200 units were completed and transferred to the next processing department during the period. So to figure out, do we need to use that information? You know, is that going to come into play? Maybe they're giving us information that we don't even need. All right, so how do I figure out the cost of the ending work in process inventory? Well, we have to look at what the information is that it gives us. The ending work in process had 2150 in materials. Its cost per equivalent unit is 1576. Well, that's all we need. We just have to multiply that together. So when we multiply it together, we get $33,884. And then we do the same thing for conversion. We got 820 at 573 per unit. So we multiply to come up with the 56.99, and then we just total them together for the end. The second one saying compute the cost of units completed and transferred out. So now we need the 20,000 units, right? Because that was completed and transferred out. So we have our units transferred to the next department, 20,200. And then we have 1576 per unit. And that was the cost of the units that were transferred out. We're just multiplying the 20,200 times the 1576 to come up with our total. Then we do the same thing for conversion, fill them in, and then just add them together. Let's see if I have one that has multiple. Sometimes I'll have one that has multiple steps. So this one, you have to compute the equivalent units, compute the cost of the ending work in process inventory. So this is just combining all the exercises that you work up to. Compute the cost of the units transferred to the next department, and then prepare the cost reconciliation for January. So the last slide is kind of that reconciliation that we were talking about. So we have to know how much cost did we have that we really originally started with, which is probably given to you. And then you just did some calculations. You figured out, you know, what it was for each material, labor, and overhead based on your cost per unit. And you add all that together and you reconcile it out. That's what we did at the end. So this problem is walking you through several different steps. So the first one saying they want you to compute those equivalent units. So it's saying that we use the weighted average, and we completed its processing of 26,200 units, transferred them to the next department. The cost of the beginning work in process inventory and the cost added during the period was 667. So they've given us our total. The ending work in process inventory in January consisted of 2,400 units, 70% complete with respect to materials and 50% with labor and overhead. So they're not breaking it out on a table for you, but they're giving it to you in the words here. And the cost per equivalent unit is this. Here's your table. And that's what you're going to use to calculate everything out. So let me see if I can get this. I guess I can hide that part. All right, so how many units did it tell us it consisted of in the ending work in process? Well, right here, 2,400 units. It says ending work in process inventory in January consisted of 2,400. So I have my 2,400 units going across here in all three: materials, labor, overhead. And then what was the percentage complete? Well, it told me 70, 50, and 50. So I'm just going to calculate it out by that. So I'll do my equivalent units. I have 1,680, 1,200, and 1,200. So I'm just filling those in the boxes, calculating that out. And then the second one says compute the cost of ending work in process inventory for materials, labor, and overhead. So now I'm looking at the cost. All right. So we have ending work in process. We have our equivalent units first. We just calculated those. That's where that top number comes from. And then we have our cost per unit, which was given to us up here in the table, 1390, 330, and 690. We multiply them out. We've got to multiply out what it is for materials, labor, and overhead. So we just multiply them together. Then we add them all up to get the 35,592. And then we want the ones that were transferred out. Well, it tells us in the problem that we had completed its processing of 26,200 and transferred them to the next department. So that's my completed and transferred out, 26,200. I just multiply it by the same numbers that were given to me on the table to come up with those costs. And so here's my total. Now, remember, this is that second piece that the second table that we did on the slides, where we did the calculations to figure out how much it was per unit. And we did the calculations with your equivalent units and the ones that were completed for the and pulled out, moved on to the next department. And we added those together to reconcile back. That's what this table is. It's doing that bottom section on that slide. So, okay, so then when we put it in, we're looking at cost of ending work in process. So ending work in process, that's the equivalent units that we figured out. It's 23,352, 3960, and 8280. We're just filling that in. The next question says compute the ones that are transferred out. Well, that's what we did on that second part. So all you're going to do is fill in the numbers there based on the numbers coming out and the cost per unit that it gives you. You can come up with your totals, fill those into the blocks. And then the last question says, do the reconciliation. Well, they gave us the total of 667. Now we have to go back and grab our costs ending work in process. Well, the ending work in process was part 2, so it's 35,592. You fill that in. Go back to 3 to get your completed and transferred out. So we're adding them together. So 631,420. And when we add these two numbers together, they should equal what was given to us. That's how we reconcile. So hopefully that was helpful, kind of walk through some of those problems. So sometimes it's laid out a little bit different. Sometimes the information is presented in a different way than maybe the slide was, but it's basically doing the same thing. We have, a table here giving us our costs per equivalent unit, but this part isn't laid out, in a table for us that says, oh, okay, 2,400 ending, here's your 70% in those little columns, telling you materials, labor, overhead. They could have given you a table, but they didn't. They just presented the information a little bit different. But you're doing the same thing. You just find the information that you need. And remember that there's, those two parts. You have that, the work in process ending inventory, which is going to be what, you're going to use your percentages so that you can calculate the units, because you're not using that whole 2,400 units, because it's telling you that the ending inventory, they're 70% complete for materials and only 50% complete for the other two. So you wouldn't use the whole 2,400. You have to do the calculation to come up with the number of equivalent units. So you want to do that and use your cost per unit to figure out your cost. And then you also want to look at what was pulled out. So it's two different things, and they broke it out in this question. They did, the first one was the ending inventory and work in process, and then the units that were transferred out. What was the cost of that? So they broke it out in 2 steps. All right. There we go. So I'll give you a question, give you the answer and how to calculate it. Direct costs, indirect costs. If it's on there, that means I want you to know what that is, what your manufacturing overhead is, selling costs, administrative costs, Then here's your product cost. We have those three. Remember your equation. What they stand for, because you could have a real simple question that just says the y in the formula or the equation this means total fixed cost. Well, then you'll know, nope, that's not correct. It's mixed cost. It's false. So it might have something real simple like that. So I'm just going through each chapter and just kind of laying out the information for you to know how to do some of the problems, and also look to see, I'm not finished yet, but look to see what else it is that you need to know in that. So on chapter 3, I'm saying know the journal entries when you move out of raw materials to work in process to finished goods, similar to what we looked at on those slides tonight. It's the same ones that we looked at on the other slides. And then you did some of that for homework as well. So when you see this, if you're not sure how to do it, go back to homework or go back to the slides to look to see, how was the journal entry set up? What was a debit? What was a credit? What did it look like on those T accounts? Because those can help. So manufacturing overhead, last week, we talked about that under and over applied. A debit balance means that it was under applied, and a credit balance mean it was over applied. So remember, when you're looking at a T account for manufacturing overhead, on the left was the actual, on the right was the applied. And I'm asking you to know that because there may be a question that comes out of knowing that information. Does this help?
Yes, going over it is helpful.
Okay. So we're talking about predetermined overhead, and I'm saying overhead rates, and I'm saying machine hours to apply the overhead jobs. And then the company has the information, the following costs, and here's all of your stuff. And then it says they estimate 650 direct labor hours and 1,200 machine hours will be worked during the year. The predetermined overhead rate will be. And so then we have to look to see, okay, we're definitely not pulling out material and labor, the direct, right? Because that doesn't go into it. Commissions are normally a period cost, so we wouldn't grab that number. But we have a salary of the supervisor and production team. So we're taking 2,500. We're pulling the indirect materials. And then we also going to pull that factory rent because we have, the facility because of the production that we do. So we're going to pull that number. We're not going to pull advertising because that's what a period cost. So you have to know, what are these items? How do I know what I need to pull in? So you add it up and it's 3,800 for my total cost. Now I'm giving you, they estimate in 650 direct labor hours and 1,200 machine hours. Do I need both of them? No, I have to go back to see, how do I determine that rate? It's telling me machine hours. So I know I got to go, okay, I got to pull the machine hours, not the direct labor hours. So I divide it by the 1,200 to come up with my rate per hour. It's $3.16. So these little problems are helpful. And like I said, when I go through the exam, I'll go through and look to see what types of questions are being asked, what do the problems look like, and I try to give you problems that are similar that are going to help you when you're going through the test. So as soon as I get done with everything, I'll post that for y'all. Focus on a study guide, but if you have to, find some of the information, you may find yourself going back to homework or going back to your lecture if you wanted to listen to that, if that's more helpful. Just going back to the PowerPoint might be helpful. So, go through it memorize the things you can memorize and then know how to work through the problems that are on there. You don't have any more questions? So,
I have another question, but I want to ask after you stop recording.
okay. So we'll have the test next week. So it'll be the, the same process. We'll open it on Thursday. You'll have till Saturday. It gives you a few days to fit it in, and then we won't meet, obviously, because we have the test. And this weekend I'll post the study guide so you know what to focus on, and work through the problems. Text me if you are stuck on something and need help with anything. Let me know that you're looking to ask a question. I have a few things going on this weekend, but I should be able to answer some questions. I'll just text you back and let you know when I can get back with you. Trying to think what else. If something's confusing on there, then just go through and go back to those notes or lectures. That's the best thing to do, is just work the problems over and over so you feel real comfortable with them and they feel easy. And that way, when you get to the test, it'll be easy to figure out how to do the calculations. So also, the other thing is, we don't do midterm grades until the 12th. So this test and the first test will be what I'm using to come up with that grade. Now, I always go back to the homeworks and I pull that in as well. So if you haven't finished those, I would get those in, because I'm gonna go back and pull and see what the percentage completion is on that, for that to pull into the 2 test scores to come up with the midterm grade. And it's only going to be, the homework's going to be for the 2 financial accounting homeworks and the 4 homeworks on these last 4 chapters. It won't be for that first week in October when we do chapter 5. Not the first week, the second week. That week we start on the 10th. We're not going to have time to include that. So it'll just be financial accounting chapters 1 through 4 and the 2 tests.